What I do is I just collect the data, and if you look at my early work, first year or two, was nothing more than collecting photographs, almost entirely. I focused on getting images, and I would post these images, the best that I could get with telescopic images, telephoto images, and post them, and ask the question, what type of plane is this? What are we dealing with? And all I will say, if you look at the photographs that I have taken, some of them which are truly remarkable in that they clearly show emissions from the entire wingspan. I have 5 of these, very good examples. They show emissions across the entire wingspan, a continuous stream. It doesn't come from the engines in that case. I'm not saying in all cases at all, but I do believe there have been different methods that have been used and experimented upon or tried. But in that case, it doesn't even come from the engines. If you look at those aircraft and you identify them, all I can say is they are commercial type aircraft in those that I have programmed. I'm not saying they're commercial aircraft because I can't see. I can't see the people. I can't see the markings with my equipment.
Mr. Carnicom, what about this?
Commercial type equipment.
Sure.
And I will clearly say that the evidence actually strongly, more than strongly, implicates the involvement and collusion and incorporation of the commercial airline industry within this operation.
Let me add something here. I have seen one jet flying at the same altitude just a few miles away here in Austin, not leaving trails that stay there for an hour or two, or leaving no trail at all, and right next to it a jet leaving a trail that's there 3 hours later. Now, what does that say?
Yeah, the classic arguments against these, and I'm familiar with most of them, but people will say, the planes are operating two different altitudes and the atmospheric conditions are different. Sorry, folks, it just doesn't hold. Anybody that digs into this seriously will see that, the conditions that you're describing there are not at variance enough to describe the tremendous difference in what Alex is speaking of right now.
Well, I know what happened. I mean, in the late 90s, contrails went from lasting 30 seconds on average, maybe a minute and a half, to being there for hours. Now, I want to know, could this be some type of resonant energy in the atmosphere that just makes normal condensation trails behave differently?
No, what happens, to the best of my knowledge, Alex, is this, in terms of the physics of what's going on. When you ask the question, how could you have I can't call them clouds because they're not really clouds anymore, but let's use that term for right now. Let's say you have a bank or layer at 35 to 40,000 feet. The region that was traditionally home to thin, high cirrus clouds, wispy clouds, and they would subsequently develop into fuller cloud forms that would descend to lower altitudes. But the high altitudes, 35,000 feet, were reserved primarily for thin, wispy clouds, and not a whole lot more. You have to ask the question, how at 35 to 40,000 feet could you have a continuous, thick layer start to develop? And it is with the introduction of the salt, a certain type of salt, not just any salt. But if you introduced a salt that can absorb moisture when the humidity is roughly 30-35%, which there are certain salts that do that, the type that I'm speaking of, now you change things because now you're able to collect and absorb moisture on extremely small particles. And let's talk about clouds for a second because let's talk about a difference between two things. Contrails, if you look at what a contrail is, contrails form, it's, what happens when you breathe on a cold winter day, right?
Not only is there the HARP effects of weapons or manipulation or conductivity of so many different things, anti-personnel on multiple levels, but it seems to be associated with weather modification. When big storms are coming in, for sure, you see these jets coming in even lower. I mean, I've seen trails getting laid down at 10, 15, 5,000 feet, which I never saw before in the past, in front of the storms, knocking them out, stopping them. A lot of researchers have pointed that out. So can you comment on some of the other aspects of this?
I'd say that's absolutely true, what you're saying there. Did you want me to elaborate on that part or go on to the other areas?
Any area you think is important, elaborate.
First would be to corroborate and confirm what it is you're saying there. There clearly is a very definite association with weather fronts in terms of these operations. Moisture is absolutely being altered, moisture patterns. The claim that these are benevolent operations has just never worked from the data side. if I could see that in the data, I would raise that scenario, but it doesn't fit. Everything here shows a covert operation, which has a malevolent effect on both the planet as well as those who live upon it. Moisture is being altered. Storm systems are being affected and manipulated. And, you know, it's a real curious thing, but if you actually look into the explanations, they don't make any sense at all in terms of what's offered here. They'll say that these things are being conducted during times of high humidity. I've looked at the humidity here, and I've looked at it up high with all the balloons. I've looked at it all the way up to 50,000, even 100,000, whatever those balloons go up, 65,000 feet. We do not have high humidity up there, and the lies that are being put forth about supposedly this is happening in a high humidity environment, it doesn't hold water at all. And as a matter of fact, talking about association with storms, I did quite a bit of work to actually try and determine what is the pattern? When are these planes coming in? And something happened that I didn't even expect.
Ben Livingston flew into hurricanes. He flew into the even bigger storms they have in the Pacific, the typhoons. He, Stanford Research Facility, certified his work for the Navy. He was the head of their big weapons research facility that they were able to kill and knock down hurricanes in the late 60s. But then our government says, oh, they know nothing about it, and there's nothing they can do about hurricanes. So we know they're being secretive. If they can knock down hurricanes, we also know that they can empower and increase the power of hurricanes. Livingston over Vietnam, with just a few planes, would take tiny clouds and cause 10 feet of rain to fall, and flooding people on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So we know they can manipulate the weather even with seeding technologies. You add into this other technologies, it's powerful. What do they appear to be doing with these chemical sprays with the weather? What does their goal appear to be?
Well, I think from a military perspective, certainly if one has the ability to control or manipulate the weather, that's a huge military advantage.
Now, you said that you were shocked. You said that you were shocked that when you did some observations of when the planes came in. Tell us about that.
Well, I think this would come to a surprise to many people. But if you actually look at the data, if you find a paper I wrote called Ions and Humidity, the big surprise to me here is that the timing of these operations actually appears to occur most likely when the humidity is at, and I have to use the word, a local minimum. What this means is low relative to before and after. It doesn't mean in absolute sense low. It means relative to what's happening before and to what's to transpire afterwards. If you find these points, what you call a local minimum of humidity, this appears to be the most likely time that these operations are coming in. That actually makes sense if you look at what's going on and with what you're talking about. That is the most advantageous time to come in, is right before the storm, not during the storm, but right before it comes in. And I'm talking, my work will show periods of several hours, so basically a window of 2 to 3 hours. And you can see that it is timed to get in there right at this absolute maximum advantage point of getting these particles in before the moisture comes in. And I believe that would be so you would have maximum absorption, basically.
In your 6-7 years studying this, is it getting more frequent? Are the operations intensifying globally, nationally?
I would say where the operation it's full in effect. This thing is in effect. The change has been made, and whether you want to call it a maintenance or a status quo, it would appear to me that we have a certain concentration level that needs to be maintained at this point. Certainly, there also appears to be something seasonal that goes on.
The BBC, and I know you saw it, had a big photograph from space of England completely covered with what it called condensation trails, and then in the article it went on to say that NASA says the Earth is 20% darker, and then just put that there, didn't make any connection to condensation trails, just had that in the space photograph.
Absolutely, and one of the tests that I did was that straightforward. I bought made what's called a photometer, a calibrated photometer, and it's a simple, straightforward test. But you had a perfectly blue, clear sky. They came in with and you have a certain light level. The planes came in, and in an hour to 2 hours, had completely transformed the sky. I conducted these tests, and there was a 20 cent per reduction. I mean, it's a straight physical thing. You are affecting the energy and light that's affecting the Earth.